Hello booktube, hello book friends, welcome back to my channel for another reading week update. This for the first week of Dr. November for Saturday the 8th of November. So most of my reading this week, you will not be surprised to hear, has been around spy fiction and non-fiction, and I will talk about that in a moment. I have also been reading the first few chapters of the Cider House Rules by John Irving. So this is a group read that I am a co-host for. We're reading Cider House Rules in November, and hopefully the prequel to that, Queen Esther, in December. So I think people have started to receive their copies of Queen Esther. It's due out, I think it was due out earlier this week in the UK, but I haven't yet received my copy, so I have to have a look and see what's happened to that. But I've read the first 4 chapters. We're reading kind of 3-4 chapters ish a week over the course of November, and discussing that in a Voxer group, which is some quite lively and interesting discussion going on in the Voxer group. Really, the first 4 chapters of this are very much introducing some of the principal characters, and there is kind of some quite dark humour mixed in amongst some other quite serious and also quite disturbing themes and messages. I think it's one of John Irving's better known books, probably because it was made into an Oscar winning film. That's what I've been reading at the start of this week. I've also finished the group read for Dr. November, The Quiet American by Greene. I'm not going to talk about too much about that because there is a live later on today, which I may or may not be in, depending on the firework situation here in the village. But a live to partly to discuss that, so I'm not going to mention it too much here. But let's talk about some of the other books that I've read this week. I mentioned in a separate video The Lantern Network by Ted Allbeury. I'll link to that video down below. Suffice to say, it was my kind of first official book of Dr. November, and it was utterly fantastic. But I go watch the other video so I don't end up sort of saying all the same things again. But yeah, it's I think a number of other people have bought that book on the strength of what I said, which I hope they enjoy it as much as I did, because I thought it was a fantastic read. And it's also interesting because I seem to have unintentionally slipped into a little bit of a kind of linked number of books, which I'll talk about. So after I finished The Lantern Network, I read Barbouze by my namesake, and Barbouze is basically a spy who was working during the Algerian conflict in the early 1960s for France against the OAS, the secret army, who were operating primarily in Algeria, but also on mainland France. Attempted assassination of Charles de Gaulle and various other things. Some bomb plots and so on. And in Barbouze, the initial opening to the book takes place in Greece, where a journalist and a friend of his are trying to visit a chain of monasteries on a Greek island, and they're staying at kind of each monastery as they go along. And when they get to one, they come across a stranger who turns out to be connected to the secret army. And then they are approached by a Barbouze who gets them involved in all sorts of things. And ultimately they end up going to Algeria and so on. So I read it primarily because I'd always known there was an author who had the same name as me, and he wrote spy fiction. So why would I not read a book by that author? I was a little bit disappointed with the book. The story was good, but the pacing was very slow, and I felt like the plot was dragging at times. The first, I don't know, 50, 60 pages were really just them going from monastery to monastery without any clear idea of what the story was about, and also not really kind of explaining anything about them other than the basics. That one was a journalist and who his friend was and so on. So a little bit disappointed in that, but it was still an interesting story. It just probably could have been written 100 pages less than it was. After I finished that, I started The Key to Rebecca by Ken Follett, which I finished yesterday. And I've read a number of Ken Follett's earlier books. This is one of his earlier spy thrillers. So this takes place in the North African desert during the Second World War. So people like General Rommel and others from the Nazi side are featured in this, and it centers around a Nazi spy who basically walks across the desert with some camels in order to get into Cairo, kind of unnoticed, which ultimately he does via another Egyptian city. But when he's in that other city, he has to kill an army corporal who discovers that he is up to no good, and as a result he then becomes a wanted man. An intelligence officer in the British Army realizes that he's probably a spy, or at least an agent for the Nazis, and sets out to track him down. And said spy is trying to A, not be captured, but B, send intelligence via radio with coded messages using Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca as the code book to Rommel in the desert so that he can advance against the Allies. So it's quite a seemingly complicated plot, but quite a simple plot, and quite a good read. Sort of middle of the road. I enjoyed it well enough. It wasn't, didn't knock my socks off. But if you're interested in that kind of period of history and the way Ken Follett ties together the fiction with sort of the facts of the time, particularly Rommel taking to Brooke and why that happened and so on. It's a good read. I'd recommend it, but it's not an outstanding. It's not as good as if you've read The Eye of the Needle. It's not as good as The Eye of the Needle, but it's still a good book. And then after that, I've started reading The Shadow War by Patrick Marnham, which I have to say I've only read the first couple of chapters, but is absolutely brilliantly well written. It concerns the betrayal and ultimately murder of Jean Moulin, who was one of the French resistance key figures during the early part of the resistance movement in France during the Second World War. And that is utterly fascinating. And I mentioned all of this tying together because Patrick Marnham first was in France during the 1960s, which is the same period of time that Barbouze is set, and all of the kind of terrorism and so on that the secret army were perpetrating was when he was in France, although he wasn't in Paris or any of the major cities, but he was aware of it going on, and he references it in the opening chapters of the book. Obviously, he is there researching French resistance, which ties into Ted Allbeury's The Lantern Network, which is all about French. So my reading this week, completely coincidentally, is all kind of wrapped up together, and it's quite odd in that way. So yeah, it's been an interesting week, reading the different books, but realizing that actually there's connection to them all. Obviously, the Key to Rebecca, set during the Second World War, not in France, but it's that period of time. And my plan with Dr. November for non-fiction was to focus around the sort of 1930s to 1950s, to get that period, and the period immediately leading up to it, and the kind of start of the Cold War. So I'm kind of, I guess, hitting that period quite heavily this week. We'll see how that translates into future weeks. I haven't picked another fiction title to read yet, although I've got a couple in mind, but I'll get a bit further on with Patrick Marnham's book and see what happens. The only other thing that I've been reading or been listening to is an audio version of A Kind of Anger by Eric Ambler. I took that out of my local library's e-audiobook collection online just before the Read What You Own challenge started. So I'd suddenly realised that I hadn't given myself an exception for audiobooks from the library, and now it's too late. It's because my Read What You Own challenge has started. So when I return that, I won't be, unless it's for a specific reading event, I won't be borrowing any more e-audiobooks until either I give up my Read What You Own challenge or it finishes. So far I have read one book since the 5th of November and the start of the Read What You Own challenge. So the Key to Rebecca is my first book. You may or may not know what the Read What You Own challenge is, but basically I am not buying any new books until after the 5th of March, with a few exceptions for certain reading events and so on, like Queen Esther for the John Irving read along. So from the 5th of November to the 5th of March, my plan is just to read books that I already own. I'm not particularly aiming for a certain number of books or a certain number of pages, which some of the other participants are doing. I'm just doing it for a period of time. I will keep a note of the number of books I read, just out of interest, not for specific target or anything like that. I've found in previous years when I've done this that if I have a specific target, I just go for the target as quickly as I possibly can. So I read the shortest books I can find, and just try and get to the target as quickly as possible. And I think for me, that is kind of mentally counterproductive, and I don't enjoy my reading quite as much. So this time I'm just going to, basically, other than reading events that I'm already signed up for, I'm just going to mood read the whole way through, and see what happens. I have, a stack of books here. There's a stack of books that you can't see out of camera. I have plenty of unread books. It's not going to be a problem finding something to read. The problem will be stopping myself from buying any more books, but we'll see how we get on. So that's it. I think that's Dr. November week 1. And yeah, I'm really enjoying it so far. We'll see what happens in week 2, and also what else I get up to in terms of reading. Obviously, John Irving continues through November, and we'll see where we get to. So, if you have been, thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you again soon. Take care. Bye bye.